December 1944, the heart of winter in the Ardennes. Snow fell relentlessly across the dense Belgian forest, muffling the thunder of distant artillery. Bastogne, a small crossroads town, had become the eye of the storm. To the men of the 101st Airborne Division, recently rushed in to hold it, Bastogne was more than just another position on a map. It was survival. Yet beneath the frozen earth, another lesser-known mission was quietly unfolding, one buried under both soil and secrecy. When German forces launched their surprise offensive on December 16, the U.S. command was caught off guard. Hitler's gamble, later known as the Battle of the Bulge, aimed to split Allied lines and capture Antwerp. Bastogne was strategically vital, a hub of 7 major roads in the Ardennes. By December 20th, German panzer divisions had surrounded it completely. Supplies dwindled, temperatures plummeted to -20, and morale wavered. But among the engineers of the U.S. Army's 326th Airborne Engineer Battalion, a cryptic new order arrived, one that didn't appear in the standard operational log. The directive came from Colonel Robert C. Hayes, a name scarcely found in any surviving documentation of the Ardennes campaign. He was attached to the Corps of Engineers but reportedly worked under the authority of the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, America's wartime intelligence agency. His orders were explicit yet vague: initiate subterranean reinforcement beneath southern Bastogne. Secure site. Maintain radio silence. The language was unusual. Reinforcement and secure site weren't typical terminology for hasty wartime fortifications. The engineers, led by Captain Earl McKinney, began excavations south of the Rue de Claveau, beneath an abandoned Belgian wine cellar that conveniently masked their entry. With German artillery constantly raining down, they worked in shifts, tunneling through frozen ground by lamplight and silence. Some soldiers believed they were constructing an emergency command post or ammunition depot. But Hayes' small detachment operated separately, often disappearing into the tunnel system long after nightfall. They didn't share blueprints. They didn't share coffee. They didn't share information. As the siege intensified, General Anthony McAuliffe's famous "nuts" reply to the German surrender demand boosted morale across the encircled town. Yet in the lower sectors, strange orders continued to flow. A requisition request, dated December 21st, recorded the delivery of 2 crates, reinforced steel, OSS label, Priority A. The contents of those crates were never logged. The signature line was left blank. The engineers were forced to dig through unstable soil, made worse by constant shelling. Several diaries recovered after the war mentioned tremors felt from beneath, as though something hollowed out the ground, one paratrooper wrote. The rumor spread that the tunnels were for an underground hospital, but no wounded were ever brought there. Instead, armed guards stood at the wine cellar entrance day and night. On December 23rd, the skies finally cleared, allowing Allied planes to drop desperately needed supplies. It was a rare moment of reprieve for the defenders. Still, deep below, Hayes' team pressed on. According to a surviving radio log fragment, at 23:47 that night, an encrypted message was transmitted from their frequency. Phase 2 complete. Securing objective. No further transmissions were recorded for 48 hours. By December 25th, Christmas Day, the situation above ground was dire. Men fought through frostbite, exhaustion, and hunger. German tanks of the 2nd Panzer Division prowled the outskirts. And then, just before midnight, one final message came through from Colonel Hayes' team, the last ever received: objective secured. Sealing entrance. God bless the 101st. The next morning, the frequency was silent. Repeated attempts to re-establish contact failed. Patrols sent to check the southern perimeter found only collapsed snowbanks and a faint smell of cordite, the residue of explosives. The cellar had caved in. No trace of the engineers remained. Bastogne's defenders assumed it was another casualty of war. Yet, strangely, in the official 101st Airborne Division records, there is no mention of any engineer detachment operating in that sector. Colonel Robert Hayes' name appears in no surviving rosters, and the 326th's after-action reports make no reference to subterranean activity. It was as if the mission and the men had been erased. To this day, historians reviewing wartime correspondence from SHAEF headquarters have noted a missing dispatch sequence between December 21 and December 25, 1944, a gap of 4 encrypted telegrams. What those messages contained remains unknown. What is known is that during the most desperate days of the siege, a U.S. Army team was ordered to dig beneath Bastogne, and never came back. As the snow continued to fall and Patton's Third Army advanced north, no one spoke of the tunnels again. Above ground, the siege neared its breaking point. Below ground, a sealed secret lay buried in silence, one that would resurface only years later, when fragments of Hayes-coded transmissions were rediscovered in declassified OSS archives. The story of the hidden U.S. Army operation beneath Bastogne begins here, in the frozen, desperate winter of 1944, when survival and secrecy intertwined beneath the soil of one small Belgian town. By late December 1944, the situation in Bastogne had reached a critical point. German artillery from the 26th Volksgrenadier Division pounded the town day and night, leaving little untouched. The 101st Airborne Division, reinforced by fragments of the 10th Armored Division, held its ground in a defiant ring of resistance. Yet amid the chaos of battle, a peculiar and secretive group of U.S. Army engineers, men under the command of Colonel Robert C. Hayes, continued to operate unseen, tunneling below the southern edge of town. Officially, Hayes was listed as an officer of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, temporarily attached to the 326th Airborne Engineer Battalion. Unofficially, he was also a liaison to the OSS, America's wartime intelligence arm responsible for espionage and counterintelligence in Europe. His orders were classified eyes only, meaning even divisional command had no access to their contents. What those orders contained remains one of the enduring mysteries of Bastogne. The stated mission, according to the limited surviving correspondence, was to fortify and stabilize the southern perimeter. But according to a post-war statement from Private First Class Raymond Heller, one of the few engineers to survive the Ardennes campaign, the task had a far more unusual purpose. "We were told to find something left behind by the Germans," Heller later recalled in a 1957 interview. Hayes said it was buried, hidden underground, in a place they didn't think anyone would look. "We were supposed to secure it before they came back for it." At first, the men believed it might be maps or encrypted documents. Intelligence officers had long known that retreating Wehrmacht units often concealed valuable material in underground caches. But as they dug deeper, the orders became more secretive. Hayes forbade any notes or sketches of the tunnels. He personally oversaw every new passage, marking the walls with coded chalk symbols instead of military coordinates. The tunneling itself was a feat of desperation and determination. Working by candlelight and the dim glow of carbide lamps, the engineers used pickaxes and shovels salvaged from nearby farms. German shells landed so close that the tunnel ceilings shook dust from the timbers. One corporal, James Larkin, wrote in a small notebook later recovered from his belongings, "Every strike of the pick feels like a heartbeat. We dig down while they die up top. It feels wrong, like we're digging into something we shouldn't." Rumors began to spread among nearby paratroopers of the 501st Regiment. They noticed armed guards stationed near the Rue de Claveau wine cellar, where the dig began. When questioned, the guards said only that the site was restricted under orders of G2 intelligence. Even the regimental chaplain, Father Sampson, reportedly asked permission to bless the tunnels before they were sealed, a request that was quietly denied. Then, on the night of December 22nd, a German delegation approached Bastogne's lines under a white flag, demanding surrender. General McAuliffe's famous reply, "Nuts," would soon echo through history. But at that same moment, deep below the southern sector, Hayes' men reached what appeared to be an old, reinforced chamber. Based on later geological surveys, the chamber lay roughly 20 feet beneath the surface, likely part of an abandoned 19th-century storage vault. Inside, they discovered partially collapsed wooden crates stamped with faded German eagle insignias and fragments of documents written in both German and French. According to later OSS speculation, the crates could have belonged to an intelligence cache, potentially containing field encryption equipment, operational maps, or even stolen Allied communications intercepts from the German Abwehr. A short radiolog, recovered decades later from a declassified OSS archive, captures the tension of that moment. The message, time-stamped 2302, December 22nd, reads simply, "Contact established. Materials recovered. Continue extraction." The handwriting next to it, possibly Hayes, adds, "Secondary objective confirmed." Yet whatever they had found, no one in Bastogne ever saw it leave. By December 23rd, the Luftwaffe launched renewed attacks, and Allied supply drops began in earnest. Civilians hiding in cellars reported hearing muffled detonations beneath their feet, as if something deep underground had been blown shut. The next day, the engineers' small radio unit ceased all transmissions. When Bastogne was finally relieved by Patton's 4th Armored Division on December 26, only fragments of the dig site remained: the wine cellar, a few twisted support beams, and the faint scent of cordite in the air. Colonel Hayes and his entire detachment were missing. Only a single dog tag was recovered, belonging to Corporal Larkin, the man who had written, "It feels wrong, like we're digging into something we shouldn't." In the chaos of war, disappearances were common. But what made this one unusual was how thoroughly it was erased. Their names were omitted from the 101 Estes after-action report. Their pay records were discontinued under the phrase, "reassignment pending." And within months, all documents referencing Operation Cradle, the rumored codename for the mission, were classified beyond top secret. To this day, historians remain divided. Some believe Hayes' team was retrieving a German intelligence cache containing plans for future V weapons. Others suspect it was something even more sensitive, evidence of Allied operations compromised early in the war. Whatever it was important enough to send a team of U.S. engineers into the frozen ground beneath Bastogne, and to bury both them and their mission forever. The disappearance of Colonel Hayes would haunt the few who remembered him. His name, absent from post-war rosters, surfaced only once more, on a sealed OSS memo dated January 4, 1945. It read, "Objective secured. Status of field unit, classified." And beneath the snow-covered ruins of Bastogne, the tunnels lay silent, their secret intact, their story just beginning to surface. By December 24, 1944, the siege of Bastogne had reached its breaking point. Snow swept through the shattered streets, covering the frozen bodies of men who had fought and fallen only hours before. The 101st Airborne Division, entrenched and surrounded, was running dangerously low on ammunition and medical supplies. Yet, amidst the suffering and heroism above ground, an eerie silence had settled beneath it. The U.S. Army Engineer Detachment under Colonel Robert C. Hayes, the men tasked with a classified subterranean mission, had gone completely silent. In military terms, radio silence can mean discipline, stealth, or disaster. In Bastogne, it meant uncertainty. For 3 days, the only transmission from Hayes' group had been a short, coded phrase, "Objective secured. Sealing entrance." It was sent at precisely 0:16 hours on Christmas morning. The message was received by a signal corps operator from the 326th Engineers who, confused by the unusual encryption format, logged it but never decoded it. It would be years before historians pieced together its possible significance. Above ground, chaos reigned. German artillery from the 26th Volksgrenadier Division and the 2nd Panzer Division continued to shell the town relentlessly. The entire landscape glowed orange and black, recalled Sergeant John L. Thompson of the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment. Every night, you could see the horizon light up like a furnace. Soldiers huddled in foxholes, half buried in snow, waiting for either death or relief. Yet despite the siege, General McAuliffe's headquarters in Bastogne maintained strict composure. When he issued his famous "nuts" reply to the German surrender demand, the men of the 101st felt renewed pride, but not everyone shared in the celebration. On the southern edge of town, near the Rue de Claveau wine cellar where Hayes' team had been working, a patrol reported a concussive blast underground just after midnight on December 25. It was strong enough to shake nearby buildings and collapse part of a street. When medics arrived, they found the entrance to the tunnel completely sealed by debris. A heavy smell of burnt explosives filled the air. "It wasn't an artillery hit," noted one medic, Lieutenant Paul Dennison. It came from below. The ground buckled upward. Despite the urgency of the siege, Dennison logged his report and sent it to regimental headquarters. It was never followed up. With lives being lost every minute above ground, there was no manpower to investigate what lay beneath. The location was hastily marked as inaccessible on the local map grid. For the engineers above ground, it was assumed Hayes' detachment had been buried alive, a tragic but not uncommon fate in the chaos of winter warfare. But a few details didn't add up. When Patton's Third Army broke through German lines on December 26, the 4th Armored Division's lead elements reached Bastogne and began immediate relief operations. Among the first to enter the southern perimeter was Lieutenant Jack Compton of the 35th Tank Battalion. In his after-action report, Compton mentioned a partially collapsed tunnel entrance fortified with U.S. explosives, suggesting it had been intentionally destroyed, not accidentally buried. "It looked deliberate," he wrote. "Charges were placed in a controlled pattern, a demolition setup, not an enemy strike." Even more curious was what they found nearby. Fragments of wooden crates, burned beyond recognition, stamped with both U.S. and German markings. The mix of symbols baffled investigators. One piece bore the faint outline of an American eagle insignia overlaid with a German Wehrmacht supply code. It was as though two worlds of secrecy had collided underground. Over the next few days, soldiers scavenged the area for usable materials. Some recovered small metallic fragments, odd lengths of wire, and what appeared to be melted radio components. One corporal described finding a half-melted metal plate, about the size of a book, covered in strange stenciling. The object vanished soon after being turned over to Command Intelligence. Officially, the recovery team listed the site as cleared of all engineering debris. Yet privately, rumors spread among the 101 ST's ranks. Some believed Hayes' men had stumbled upon a cache of German communications equipment or prototype technology, possibly remnants of the Enigma encryption devices. Others thought it was a hidden repository for looted documents, perhaps from the German intelligence service, the Abwehr. Whatever the truth, it was clear that someone, either Hayes' men or their superiors, had decided the site needed to be buried for good. By early January 1945, the battle for Bastogne was turning in the Allies' favor. Patton's forces pushed eastward, and the frozen town was finally resupplied. As units rotated out, military clerks began the grim process of accounting for the dead, wounded, and missing. Colonel Robert Hayes and his 12-man detachment were recorded as MIA, presumed killed in action. No graves were ever found. No personal effects were recovered. Their names appeared once in a confidential engineering ledger, then were redacted entirely from later archives. Years later, when the National Archives released portions of the OSS European field records, historians found references to Operation Cradle, Bastogne sector, success confirmed, unit terminated. But every document ended abruptly after that phrase. No description of the objective, no mention of Hayes, and no context for what had been found. One particularly haunting note, written in the margin of an OSS summary sheet and dated January 3, 1945, reads, "Hayes secured the material. Tunnel sealed. Recovery postponed indefinitely." Whether the material referred to intelligence, technology, or something else entirely remains unknown. What is known is that Hayes and his men vanished without trace, leaving behind only fragments of evidence and a sealed underground chamber that no one dared reopen. As snow thawed and the war moved on, Bastogne became a symbol of American resilience, the battered bastion that refused to fall. But beneath the triumph and remembrance lay a quiet enigma. What was the true nature of the hidden operation beneath Bastogne? And why was it erased from the record so completely? Those questions would begin to resurface years later, when post-war declassification efforts uncovered the first whispers of a deeper secret, one that tied Bastogne to covert intelligence warfare stretching far beyond the frozen forests of the Ardennes. December 26, 1944, the day the siege of Bastogne was broken. Snow fell like ash as Patton's Third Army pushed through the German ring, bringing tanks, supplies, and hope to the exhausted men of the 101st Airborne. Bastogne had survived. The defenders were hailed as heroes, their defiance immortalized in the annals of military history. But as reporters, generals, and photographers crowded the snowy streets to celebrate liberation, few noticed the strange military cordon forming around the town's southern perimeter, precisely where Colonel Robert C. Hayes and his men had disappeared. The operation to secure that sector was assigned to a joint team of engineers and intelligence officers, operating under the 4th Armored Division. Their immediate task: assess any remaining tunnel structures, eliminate hazards, and identify potential German booby traps. But according to post-war records, what they found beneath Bastogne was neither German nor easily explained. The first account came from Lieutenant Jack Compton, the same tank officer who had noted intentional demolition patterns at the tunnel site. His written report, dated December 27, stated, "Subterranean entrance located and sealed. Evidence of controlled detonation from inside. Recovered fragments of crates with mixed U.S. and German origin markings. Unknown equipment present, partially destroyed by fire." The report was marked classified and forwarded to higher command, but the copy filed in the division's daily log was replaced with a blank page stamped redacted by G2. To most soldiers, the tunnels were a mystery best left alone. Patton himself, visiting Bastogne on December 30th, was briefed only on the condition of the troops and supply lines. No mention of Hayes or the underground activity appears in his diary. Yet, somewhere in the OSS archives, a separate file began to grow, one labeled Operation Cradle, Bastogne, Confirmed Contact. Declassified fragments from that file reveal that an investigative team from the OSS Counterintelligence Branch, X2, arrived in Bastogne on January 2, 1945. Their names, Agents Matthew Corwin and Lydia Price, appear briefly in mission logs before being reassigned days later. In a short memorandum addressed to OSS headquarters in London, Corwin wrote, "Site inspected. Evidence of deliberate collapse. Metallic debris of mixed manufacture. Recommend further recovery postponed pending strategic conditions." The phrase, mixed manufacture, would puzzle historians for decades. Some interpreted it as a reference to captured German material repurposed by Allied intelligence. Others suggested something more clandestine, a joint recovery or exchange operation. The physical remnants recovered from the tunnel entrance were sent to a secure depot near Luxembourg City. There, a team of ordnance specialists catalogued fragments that included melted steel boxes, wire coils, and a shattered radio set bearing a serial number inconsistent with U.S. Signal Corps equipment. The inventory, once filed, was later struck from the record with the note, "Transferred to higher authority." No destination was listed. Meanwhile, survivors from the 326th Airborne Engineer Battalion were quietly questioned. Many reported never knowing about Hayes or his detachment. One sergeant recalled seeing trucks marked with non-standard military codes parked near the tunnel site just before the final explosion. "No unit insignia, no numbers," he said in a 1947 interview. "They loaded something in the middle of the night and drove east, toward Luxembourg, not the front." His statement, filed by an Army historian, was dismissed as unverified. Civilian witnesses told similar stories. A Bastogne resident named Émile Marchand, who lived near the Rue de Claveau, later recounted seeing American soldiers guarding the ground as if it hid something valuable. In a post-war letter to a Belgian newspaper he wrote, "When the tanks came to free us, they sealed the tunnel again. I saw them pour concrete over it. They said it was dangerous, but I think it was something else, something they didn't want found." By early 1945, the war's momentum had shifted eastward, and Bastogne's mysteries were overshadowed by the Allied advance into Germany. The tunnels were declared unsafe and permanently closed by the Belgian Reconstruction Authority in 1946. However, internal correspondence between the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the War Department that same year makes several curious references to post-siege subterranean hazards requiring continuing U.S. oversight. The area remained off-limits to local excavation for nearly 2 decades. In 1953, during an effort to restore war-torn infrastructure, a Belgian work crew accidentally exposed a small section of the sealed tunnel near the southern outskirts of Bastogne. Inside, they found rusted fragments of U.S. equipment and a piece of engraved metal marked property of U.S. Army, Section B-7. The find was immediately confiscated by American military representatives stationed in Brussels. Officially, it was labeled unrelated ordnance material. Unofficially, it reignited speculation that Hayes' mission had been far more than routine engineering work. Modern researchers have since pieced together that Operation Cradle may have been linked to the Allied effort to capture German research and intelligence assets before the Soviets could reach them, a precursor to what would later become Operation Paperclip. If so, the Bastogne site might have contained sensitive materials recovered from German field offices in France or Luxembourg, hastily hidden during the retreat. Yet, the mystery remains: if the mission succeeded, why erase every record of it, and why destroy the site? One possibility, raised by historian Dr. Evelyn Roth in her 1989 paper Buried Secrets of the Ardennes, is that the recovered material implicated both sides in clandestine exchanges during the war's final months. The complete erasure of Hayes' detachment from U.S. records, she wrote, suggests the operation's outcome conflicted with official wartime narratives. Today, the southern perimeter of Bastogne is quiet, marked only by farmland and memorial plaques to the 101st Airborne. But under that frozen soil still lie remnants of tunnels, sealed by explosives more than 80 years ago. Ground-penetrating radar surveys in the 1990s revealed long, narrow cavities running beneath the area once held by the engineers, untouched, unexcavated, and still registered under U.S. jurisdiction. What exactly lies beneath remains the enduring question. Was it a hidden cache of intelligence, a failed recovery, or something more compromising, evidence of a shadow operation buried along with the men who carried it out? As Bastogne emerged from war into legend, the truth beneath its soil remained sealed, a silent chamber of wartime secrets that no one, even decades later, dared to open. The war ended, but the silence surrounding Bastogne deepened. In May 1945, Germany surrendered, and Europe began the arduous process of rebuilding. Officially, the U.S. Army closed all active engineering projects in Belgium and transferred command responsibilities to occupation forces. Yet among the declassified records from that period lies a gap, a series of missing files between January and March 1945 that references an operation codenamed Cradle. Those pages are still redacted in their entirety, even today. In the post-war months, the newly reorganized Office of Strategic Services, soon to become the CIA, initiated an intelligence audit across liberated Europe. Their goal was to secure any remnants of German research, codebooks, or advanced weaponry before the Soviet Union could claim them. It was during this chaotic sweep that Operation Cradle reappeared, not as a new mission, but as a resolved file. The accompanying summary, written by an unnamed OSS officer, contained a single line: objective recovered, materials secured. No field survivors. The phrase, no field survivors, referred to Hayes' detachment. But what was their objective? To this day, no surviving OSS documents define it clearly. A 1947 memorandum between two former OSS officers, Colonel L. Donovan and Captain M. Corwin, the same Matthew Corwin who inspected the tunnels, gives a tantalizing hint: recovered items verified as genuine. Recommend concealment under alternate classification. Public disclosure inadvisable due to cross-asset implications. The term cross-asset was OSS jargon used for operations involving multiple Allied nations. Often, intelligence that had been shared, stolen, or duplicated without authorization. The implications were staggering. Could it be that Hayes' mission was tied to British or French intelligence materials, or even to a pre-existing covert network operating beneath the chaos of the Battle of the Bulge? Post-war British records from the Special Operations Executive, SOE, mention several lost assets in the Ardennes region around December 1944, couriers carrying documents from occupied Luxembourg toward Allied lines. Those couriers were never found. Their route passed directly through Bastogne. It's possible Hayes' men were sent to locate them, or what they were carrying. According to British historian Dr. Alan Moreau, who studied the OSS-SOE liaison files, Cradle may have been a joint Anglo-American operation to recover intelligence caches left behind during the German advance. If the cache contained communications logs or lists of field agents, Exposure could have compromised entire post-war networks. That would explain the total erasure. The idea gained credibility in 1968 when the U.S. Army declassified a small cache of OSS field signals. Among them was an encrypted message dated December 20, 1944, marked Priority A, Cradle. Target coordinates established. Expect local resistance. Secure without external notice. 2 days later, another message, Engaged, hostile interference confirmed, casualties likely. Both were signed RH, the initials matching Colonel Robert Hayes. After that, the record ends. Meanwhile, local accounts of strange activity in Bastogne persisted. Belgian civilians reported seeing unmarked U.S. trucks moving through the area at night in early 1945, long after the front had moved east. They carried no unit designations, and their movements were never logged by Allied transport authorities. One Belgian police report dated February 17 describes an American detachment collecting sealed metal containers from the ruins of the southern sector. The cargo, it said, was transported toward Luxembourg. The entry was later struck from the municipal archives. By the 1950s, when the Cold War intensified, the OSS had dissolved into the newly formed CIA, and most wartime field files were absorbed or destroyed. References to Operation Cradle vanished entirely. Only through scattered intelligence summaries and engineer reports can fragments be reconstructed, enough to suggest that Bastogne's hidden tunnels were not an accident of war, but a deliberate effort to recover something far more consequential. Former OSS officer Matthew Corwin resurfaced in 1952 as a consultant for the Central Intelligence Agency. In a brief interview recorded decades later, Corwin was asked about the Bastogne operation. He replied only, "We were told to make sure it stayed buried. Some things were never meant to be found twice." He refused to elaborate further. The surviving engineers' families received no official notice of death, only certificates reading, "Missing, administrative determination." Colonel Hayes' wife, Eleanor, reportedly petitioned the Army for clarification in 1946 but was told the mission details were sealed under the National Security Clause of 1944. Her letter was returned stamped, "No further correspondence authorized." In the 1970s, renewed interest in wartime secrets brought the Bastogne case briefly back into public discussion. Journalists from Stars and Stripes and the Sunday Times published speculative pieces about the vanishing colonel. The U.S. Department of Defense dismissed the reports as fictionalized exaggerations, but one FOIA request, filed by historian Dr. Evelyn Roth in 1979, uncovered a chilling memo in the National Archives, Bastogne's Subterranean Files. Destroy on Review, Section B7. The signature block was blank. The more researchers uncovered, the clearer it became that the official silence was deliberate. OSS veterans referred to certain post-war containment orders, missions deemed too politically sensitive to acknowledge. Hayes' mission seemed to fit that pattern perfectly. Some suggest it wasn't only a recovery operation, but a cover-up, that whatever was found beneath Bastogne could have undermined Allied credibility in the fragile post-war balance. To this day, the nature of the materials remains unknown. Some claim they were prototype communications equipment from German intelligence laboratories. Others suggest they were documents revealing Allied infiltration within Axis ranks. What unites all theories is one fact: the mission succeeded, but those who carried it out never returned. Operation Cradle may have closed with a single line, "Objective secured," but its implications stretched far beyond the Ardennes. Beneath the triumph and tragedy of Bastogne lies a story of wartime intelligence, silent sacrifice, and secrets so dangerous that even victory demanded their burial. And yet, decades later, faint traces would surface again, not from dusty archives, but from beneath the ground itself. Today, Bastogne stands as one of the most visited sites of World War II remembrance. The Martison Memorial overlooks the town, etched with the names of the 50 U.S. states, a tribute to the courage of the 101st Airborne Division and the men who fought there. Tourists stroll along cobblestone streets, unaware that beneath their feet lies a sealed network of tunnels, buried since 1944. The war above ground is well documented. The one beneath, the hidden operation led by Colonel Robert C. Hayes, remains shrouded in silence and secrecy. In 1983, nearly 40 years after the siege, a Belgian construction crew laying new waterlines south of Rue de Claveau unearthed an anomaly, a segment of reinforced concrete containing what appeared to be a blast door, sealed from the inside. Local authorities halted work immediately and alerted the Belgian military, who in turn contacted the U.S. Embassy in Brussels. Within 24 hours, an American liaison team arrived and quietly assumed control of the site. Witnesses recalled unmarked trucks removing debris under armed guard. No official statement was ever released. The excavation report was classified by NATO under infrastructure security. Rumors began to circulate among local historians that the crew had uncovered part of Hayes' tunnel system. A retired Belgian officer, Captain Lucien Vautrin, later claimed that he had seen fragments of U.S. Army equipment recovered from the site, including a rusted sign marked Cradle 2A. He said, "They told us it was unsafe, unstable ground, possible munitions. But I think they found something they didn't want to explain." The story was dismissed publicly, but several archival researchers in Brussels confirmed that a brief communication from the U.S. Department of Defense to Belgian authorities did exist. Its subject line simply read, "Recovery Operation, Bastogne Sector, Terminated." Over the next 2 decades, the legend of the tunnels grew. In 1994, during the 50th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge, a U.S. Army delegation quietly placed a wreath near the southern outskirts of the town, far from the main memorial grounds. There was no ceremony, no speech. Only a simple bronze plaque was set into the ground, bearing a few words, "In memory of those who served in silence." The locals took it as a general tribute to engineers and support units. But among historians of military intelligence, it was recognized as something else, a quiet acknowledgement of Operation Cradle. Modern technology has only deepened the mystery. In 1997, a joint Belgian-American archaeological survey employed ground-penetrating radar, GPR, to map Bastogne's underground structures. The results were startling. 2 long, linear voids, consistent with man-made tunnels, extending southward from the town's perimeter. One section appeared to terminate abruptly beneath what is now farmland. The other curved east, deeper underground, before vanishing beyond the radar's range. Requests for excavation permission were denied by both Belgian and U.S. authorities. Officially, the reason was potential unexploded ordnance. Unofficially, researchers suspect the area remains under U.S. jurisdiction as a residual wartime site. Forensic engineer Dr. Evelyn Roth, whose earlier work uncovered references to Hayes' erased detachment, visited Bastogne in 2003 to document these findings. Standing over the suspected tunnel entrance, she described an uneasy silence in the air. "Every local I spoke to knew something was buried here," she later wrote. "But it's not ghosts or myths, it's history the world isn't ready to revisit." The physical evidence of Hayes' mission remains elusive, but the paper trail tells a different story. In 2011, a minor declassification at the U.S. National Archives revealed a memorandum from January 1945, addressed to OSS Headquarters, London, subject, Bastogne extraction. Confirmation of recovery. Artifacts secured for transfer via Luxembourg to London. Unit non-operational. The memo was signed by Major Lydia Price, one of the 2 OSS field agents who inspected the site immediately after Bastogne's liberation. The memo's final line reads, "Recommend suppression of incident. Public disclosure incompatible with ongoing post-war negotiations." It was the last known document ever to mention Operation Cradle. What, then, was the truth? Theories persist. Some claim the tunnels hid a cache of stolen German intelligence records, recovered and suppressed to protect Allied post-war leverage. Others believe Hayes' men uncovered documentation related to secret negotiations between certain German officers and Western allies, evidence that could have fractured the fragile unity of the wartime alliance. Whatever the truth, it was important enough to bury, and dangerous enough to ensure that those who found it never returned. Time has done little to erode the secrecy. The coordinates of the sealed tunnel system remain redacted in both Belgian and American archives. Access to the site is restricted under NATO jurisdiction, and local authorities are discouraged from authorizing any excavation. The ground remains undisturbed, frozen in both soil and silence. Today, the people of Bastogne live peacefully above a battlefield that once defined courage and endurance. Children play where tanks once burned. Shops sell souvenirs to tourists tracing the footsteps of heroes. But beneath the cobblestones and farmland lies another layer of history, one that the official record refuses to acknowledge. The story of the hidden U.S. Army operation beneath Bastogne is not one of victory or defeat. It is a story of silence, of men who vanished into the earth, carrying secrets that reshaped the end of a world at war. Whether they were engineers, intelligence officers, or something in between, their sacrifice remains unmarked, their mission unfinished. The tunnels still sleep under Belgian soil, sealed with explosives and history alike. And so, every winter, when snow falls softly over Bastogne and the town remembers its defenders, the earth beneath remains untouched, a quiet reminder that not all of World War II's battles ended when the guns fell silent.